Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Welcome back to the Prospective Doctor podcast. This is Yash and Shree. If you remember last time, we talked about BSMD programs. That's the series that we're doing here at Prospective Doctor. And we wanted to kind of do 3 or 4 or even more episodes about how we got involved in BSMD programs and what they are. So last episode was about the search in terms of how do you narrow down which programs to apply to. Now that we've covered that, we wanted to talk about how you apply in terms of the nitty-gritty stuff. And the first part of the application that we're going to talk about is arguably the most important in my opinion, and that's the essay. And in terms of the essay, there are multiple essays that you have to write, but first we're going to start off with what goes into a good college application essay and a BSMD application essay. And then we're going to talk about the technicalities in terms of how many do you have. So Yash, do you want to start it off in terms of what exactly do you have to look for in a BSMD applicant's essay and why is it important?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the biggest, most important things is that these essays are fundamentally different from any of the other essays you're going to write during your college application process. Sure, you might be writing lots of different supplementals and you might be writing lots of different college-specific essays, but the essay for why medicine and that most of these BSMD programs require is just going to be different in the sense that they're asking for a specific, and they're looking for a specific answer to a specific question. Now, obviously, this answer is different for everyone, but the question is, why do you want to pursue medicine? And more than that, it's, convince us that at this young age, you know for sure that you want to pursue medicine. That's really what they're looking for. And so I think, at least for me, I felt like this was a very different essay from the other stuff that I was writing. And I really had to take some time to think about it and separate myself from the other kind of essays I was writing, because it's hard to think about this in the same lens that you think of your other essays. The other thing about these essays is that it's really the only look that these schools get at you before they obviously interview you as to your passion for medicine and why you want to do medicine. So it's really their only way of getting to know your story before they make some decisions, at least some preliminary decisions. So it can be a great way to express yourself and a great way to get your story out there. Yeah, what did you think, Shree, about that? Just in terms of how to look at the essay when you're getting into it or evaluating it.
Yeah, I think that at least before even talking about the process of looking at an essay, what really scared me about that part of the application is that was the most variable part of the application, and that's the most chance that you get to show your own character, and everything else on your application is kind of set in stone by the time you get to the phase of actually writing your application, all the activities that you've done. So you've kind of mulled them over for a long time. But with the essay, I was just afraid of kind of not getting it right the first time. And I think that's a really bad way of just thinking about the essay in general. It's not this one-stop shop. You have time to revise and resubmit. And that's why it takes 2 to 3 months to even get to a finished product. I can't tell you how many drafts I've made of my college application essay, and going through each iteration with the people who were proofreading it definitely helped me hone down that story you were talking about. So I just wanted to make that point clear just before you moved on to what to put in the essay.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point, right? That it can seem like kind of a daunting aspect, right? I think I mentioned this earlier that convince me why at the age of 18 or 17 or 16 maybe that you think you're set for a career in medicine, right? That can seem pretty overwhelming and daunting. But I think what I experienced, and I think what you were alluding to, is the process of writing this essay can actually A, help you understand that better for yourself, and B, the sequential draft versus drafts, and then also consulting with different people and getting help, having people help you revise it can help you kind of get to that more finalized essay too. So it's not something to kind of be too worried or too afraid of. It's just something that I think you have to know. You have to look at a little bit differently.
Right, exactly. And speaking of like what you have to do differently, like, do you want to talk a little bit about like what planning that you did in order to get to your final product in terms of how you thought about like the story that you finally put to paper when you were applying?
Yeah, for sure. So when I first kind of looked at the essay, I did a very rough first draft. And honestly, that draft was probably terrible. I think I might still have it somewhere, but for starters, I was way above the word limit. All these essays are going to have anywhere from 400 to 500 word limits on it. And I think I was probably at like 1,000 when I wrote my first one. I just kind of went into it. I tried writing something about like my first experiences in medicine, and then wrote more about, I kind of went chronologically throughout the course of my life and different like medical experiences I'd had, tried connecting them to each other. I thought that would be the best way to do it. And I just spent a lot of time kind of describing different events in my life and such, and ended up with like what I thought was, a good essay to read, maybe something interesting, but definitely not a good like why medicine essay. It was just too much information with nothing like really actually deliverable. Or there were some like good parts to use from it, but not as a whole. It wasn't what should be submitted. So, but I think that step was very important for me, even though it didn't end up being like anywhere close to my final draft. Just kind of writing all my thoughts down in some kind of like prose, like really helped me just get started, just have something to go off of. I don't know if you use a different method. I know like some people use outlines and stuff like that, and I just kind of decided to go for it, and then I actually made an outline after that. I don't know, what did you do when you were planning, Shree?
Yeah, so I think that's like a perfect segue in terms of like what I did when I came into the process. So I was really kind of confused in terms of what exactly a college application looked like. So I kind of asked around in terms of like teachers and stuff just to get an idea, because they'd read so many applications. Like they would kind of have a vein, and they all gave me the same advice, which was don't take anyone else's advice and kind of do your own thing. I was too busy just thinking about what would the person across the table reading my essay want to see, that I didn't get to put my own experiences onto paper. So once I got that idea out of my head, the ideas flew way faster in terms of out of my head onto paper. And I think that that's like the biggest advice that I have in terms of crafting a good story. It has to be very personable. And since you've lived it, you should always like tell the truth in terms of like how you experienced it, because it's your truth. And that's like what you should portray on this application. Now, that being said, like obviously there are some facets that you may need to kind of drag on that may not have like felt that way in the moment, but like in order to tell a good story, you have to, that shows your character. I think that you may need to like kind of dwell on some moments more than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're trying to say. I think like it's important to be telling an authentic, true story that you've experienced. But in the process of writing the essay, you'll be able to understand like which moments and which parts that you need to emphasize, which may have not felt as emphasized or as important when you were living it. Is that kind of what you meant?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant. And I think so. I chose to write about one experience that I had when I was volunteering at a nursing home. And I think that the day-to-day minutia may not have seemed like a story when I was living it, but then when I kind of was removed from the experience and I was sitting at my computer and writing it onto Microsoft Word, I was like, wow, like all of these experiences really point to a common arc in terms of a story. And that's like, I really like helping people and kind of putting all those experiences that I've had into like one linked story. At the end, I was like, wow, like I've had all of this, but as you mentioned, it was like way over the word limit at first, and I had to cull down the important moments that I could kind of have to portray some other aspect of my life in terms of my own character.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great segue for what I wanted to say next, which is the importance of showing that you mean something by like telling stories about stuff that you did, right? Like you mentioned that your experiences volunteering. I think that's like a great example of you have this feeling that I like helping people, or I want to go into medicine, I want to help people. But you need to be able to illustrate that you really mean that, and it's something that you've learned through doing and not just through thinking about and saying, right? And that in itself is in conflict when you're trying to tell this through like a story or an essay. At least for me, I felt like it was kind of weird. Like I'm basically like, I felt like I have to write a story, I have to tell someone something, but I have to tell someone something through the lens of me like experiencing and doing things, which seems counterintuitive sometimes. And balancing that is very important. The other part to that is that you also have to balance, telling your life story, really, which is what this is, while also telling important stuff about yourself, things that you've done. And it's just like this juxtaposition of, how you feel and like what drives you, balanced with your experiences and stuff that you've done in your life so far.
Right. And a lot of the times when I get asked about, how should I plan my essays by people who are trying to apply to a BSMD program, and they're looking for a cookie cutter response in terms of paragraph 1, say this, paragraph 2, say that. It's really not like that, just because having a narrative flow to your story after hundreds of applications of the same printout of their resume, basically, admissions officers are looking for someone fresh, someone new, and just telling your own experience is something unique. And I think that that's just the point that I want to impress. And the second point that I wanted to kind of say from your experiences of like writing and getting to this story is that your experiences may seem clear to you when you write it, but other people, when they read it, they may say, this is not clear, or this doesn't really make sense to me. And I've definitely gotten a lot of that. So my other advice would be have a lot of people look over it, and diverse people too. So not just your parents or your friends, but also your teachers, your guidance counselor, anyone who has a hand in terms of having read essays before and having a good idea of what a good essay looks like.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Their input, just fresh eyes in general, can mean so much. You're laboring over writing something, not just this, just any kind of essay. Like just a different perspective can mean so much in terms of the final product. I think that's a great point. In terms of what you were talking about with writing about your experiences and stuff like that, and how there's no real like cookie cutter way to go about this, I think that's also like a very important point to stress. If there was like a formula as to how this why med essay should go, everyone would be just writing the same why med essays, and theoretically they could all be the same. They'd all be getting into med school, right? That's just not the case. That these I think these counselors, admissions people, are really looking for unique perspectives, and that's where like your life story and what you're saying, apart from the experiences, is really going to matter, and how you deliver your story is also going to matter.
Right. And I think that delivering your story is like a good segue to talk about what you should stress in terms of your essay. I know we said there's no cookie cutter thing, but there are definitely application tips that we could give in terms of what was in our essays. So as I mentioned before, I talked about a volunteer experience that was very clinical, but it doesn't necessarily have to be clinical. It could be a research realization. It could be something that kind of talks to your ability of succeeding in med school. And there are different essays that you have to write. Some med schools have more than others. I remember for my BSMD program, it was just a common application essay, but there are multiple essays for each med school, and you really have to keep on top of the deadlines for each one. I know we talked about that in the previous episode, but it also applies very heavily to essays, just because there are more than one application. There's one for the undergrad college, and there may also be one for the medical school, and both of them have essays of their own. So there's definitely going to be a why medicine essay, for example. There's going to be a why our school essay, and there's obviously going to be the common application essay. So between those three, you have three major essays that probably each school will want. And they may be in some variation of that. They may be a short answer, or they may be a full-on essay, but obviously they each have their word limits, and they're free response. So you have to kind of craft a story that fits in that word limit.
Definitely agree. Earlier when I said like, there's no cookie cutter way to go about this. And like you said, like paragraph 1 is this, paragraph 2 is this. That is true. But that being said, like you said, there are some parts that you have to include in these essays. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think I've been talking mainly about the why medicine essay, but I'm glad you mentioned that, there are these other essays too that are going to be a part of your application. Typically, these are essays that you would probably have to complete even if you weren't applying to combined programs, like supplemental essays and stuff. As far as the why medicine essay goes and what stuff you have to include, we could talk a little bit about some of the key components, but just know that for like more detailed kind of explanations and like kind of lists of what things you should be thinking about and stuff to include in the essay, in the why medicine essay specifically, Med School Coach has some great resources online that might be able to help with that. When I was writing the essay, loosely, I was not in any particular order. Stuff I was thinking about is I wanted to illustrate that A, I had a curiosity and passion for science. B, I liked helping people. I had a lot of experiences in working with other people and helping people, and that's what I wanted to do. And then the last part was I wanted to talk about the stuff that I had done throughout, high school that led me to believe that. So the synthesis of these three main kind of ideals is what led to my essay. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but I think that's a good place to start. I guess a fourth part that you could include is a personal kind of connection if you have any kind of personal reasons for why medicine is the path you've chosen.
Right. And I just wanted to add a little bit onto like what you said. And I think that 2 resources that we didn't mention were, first, reading a lot of essays that your school may have, in terms of they may have solicited upperclassmen who got into good schools or good universities, and they kind of may have an example for you to look at in terms of what does a good essay look like. And a lot of the times you may even have a direct connection to upperclassmen in college or in high school that have successfully applied, that and then they can give you a good idea of like how the school looks like. And if there's one thing that I want to emphasize is the research aspect. Definitely, this is a school that you're probably going to spend 3+, 4+ years at, and you're definitely going to want to look into what kind of classes are offered there, how is the social life like. These things are important for the search, obviously, but they can also be very valuable to the research for your essays because, for example, if you're applying to maybe a small school in the Midwest, maybe don't talk about how you like to go out with friends to a big city because there may not be a big city around. And school admissions officers look for that because they're like, oh, did this person just copy paste from a bigger school? And do they really want to come here? So it may seem that you're not really doing due diligence when you're writing these essays. And then the second thing that I wanted to say, and you were definitely right about talking about like what you put in your essays, Yash, because I think that you always have to relate it back to you. If I talk about the experiences in the nursing home, for example, and I didn't relate it back to me, and I just talked about the residents and how the residents were so helpful, they're like, then maybe we should admit them and not you. So I think that just another point to mention is just like you should definitely relate it back to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good example, right? Like you want to tell a story, but make sure that story is about you and you're the main character in the story.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points research-wise, looking into the school, connecting with people who are, gone through this, all key parts. Definitely want to emphasize the part about not copy-pasting and making sure that your essays are tailored to each school. Obviously, once you make one core essay that you finalized for why medicine specifically, you're going to be able to use a lot of that for your other essays. And we're not saying that you can't copy paste like anything. I think like college application process, if you apply to a lot of schools, like anyone will tell you that you're kind of able to use some essays multiple times with some customization, obviously, right? But that customization is key. Right. That's what is important. I think making those silly mistakes, like one of something like you mentioned about, applying to a small Midwestern school and having something in there about a big city, that's just something that's going to immediately take you out of the running. So that's something to pay attention to.
Right. One more thing that I did want to mention is just like about the technicalities of writing. You don't have to be a stellar writer in terms of you don't have to practice writing, but some things can kind of make your essay stand out. And that's like definitely showing, not telling. If you like use all your five senses, I know a lot of English teachers just stress that, but I just want to stress it again in terms of your college application essay, because it's just like, how did you feel in that moment? Like in the moment that you're talking about, maybe you're feeling really nervous, right? Like, so a good way to kind of talk about that nervousness is just like, how did you see the crowd? Maybe like if you're giving a speech in like debate, how did you see the crowd? Like how did like your blood was pumping, your the energy was uncontrollable? Like it's just like the environment. Like how did you describe that environment? Think about it that way rather than just saying like, oh, I was really nervous when I stepped up to like give the speech, because that's just like, that's a given, right? Like everyone's going to be nervous when they're speaking in front of public, but you really want to paint a picture of like how you felt during that moment.
Yeah, I think that's
I just wanted to say
really
that.
important too, right? Like I had a sentence, I was trying to say something about the first time that I shadowed a surgeon. And I think when I first wrote it, I literally just wrote like, I had the opportunity to like see my first surgery and it was awesome, or something. Obviously not like that, but something like that, where I was just telling the fact that I did that. And then the final product was actually something about me explaining like the emotions that I was feeling while I was like watching that surgery, which is, it seems like it's the same thing, but it's actually completely different and can deliver a much better depiction of not only like what you did, but also like how you felt and what that meant to you. So a simple, like different way about going about the same thing, can make a huge difference.
Exactly. And I think that is a great place to like kind of conclude it. We talked about a little bit about like what we should think about when you're applying in terms of the research component, then like how you should think about structuring your why medicine essay, which is definitely by far the most important essay and like definitely what you're going to be using to talk about in the interview. And then finally, we concluded with the kind of the nitty-gritty stuff with technicalities of how you should write this essay. And definitely if you were looking for like a one-stop shop to describe your life, we can't really do that because like we don't know who's listening to this, and you're the best person to kind of distill your life experiences into one essay. But with the tools recorded in this podcast, I think you should definitely be at a very, very good point.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I had one take-home thing I wanted to give out of this, it would be, make it your own. Everyone kind of goes looking for a rubric or outline or something. Make your own outline. Like I said, there's some key parts that you have to include. And there's some key things to be like thinking about. Make everything like personalized and related back to your story. And, like obviously you want to mention your experiences, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone kind of knows these things, and there are ample resources available for these things. But I think the key part, or like what I think is important and what's going to make essays stand out, and honestly, I think admissions counselors can sense this, is when it's authentic and truly yourself, and you kind of you go your own way about it and you make it personalized. So I think that's like, right. For me at least, the most important part about this process.
Yeah. Thanks, Yash. And I think that's a great place to conclude. This has been part 2 of the BSMD series that we're doing. And just as a concluding statement, I think that it really comes down to your own story. We've kind of repeated that multiple times, but it's just a take-home message. And the next episode, we're probably going to be talking about the next part of the process in terms of, we talked about the application, we talked about the search, and now we're going to be talking about when you actually get there, what do you say? And that's the interview. So catch us next time on the Prospective Doctor podcast. And if you need any more information, we'll be sure to include our contact information in the show notes. So definitely check those out. Thanks, and have a great day.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.